Why do you believe atheists are persecuted? In America, at least.
It's a good question. Not to quibble, but it seems to me persecute might not be the best word to use here. Persecution is really about persistently oppressive treatment or harassment that I suspect most atheists in the United States don't experience. That said, data clearly show that the vast majority of Americans view atheists as outsiders and people who are not to be trusted. For example, last year, sociologists at the University of Minnesota found that Americans rate atheists below Muslims, recent immigrants, gays and lesbians, and just about everybody else, with respect to, quote, sharing their vision of American society. Even though atheists are few in number, not formally organized, and relatively hard to publicly identify, they are seen as a threat to the American way of life by a majority of the American people. Of course, the question you ask is why? Seems to me that there are at least three reasons for this. First, religion is not inherently tolerant. It's quite the opposite, in fact, inherently intolerant, sometimes manifesting its intolerance in deadly ways, but even in its less lethal expressions, still ugly. This is not to say that every religious person is an intolerant prick, but there's no shortage of those. Anyway, the point is that compromise is not the hallmark of religion. Tolerance is not inherent in its structure. Since the vast majority of Americans is religious, and religion is not inherently tolerant, it doesn't take a PhD to figure out how atheists end up being so intensely disliked. The second reason atheists are so intensely disliked is because atheism has been equated with communism in the United States. Here I'm indebted to an analysis done by historian and poet Jennifer Michael Hecht, author of the brilliant book Doubt, A History. Hecht argues early 20th century America was a wonderful place to be a doubter, a free thinker, someone who challenged the conventional wisdom, even the conventional religious wisdom. This closed down in the 1950s with the Cold War. The United States had a violent and powerful enemy in the Soviet Union. Soviet communism, and communism elsewhere, made legalist gestures of atheism. And it wasn't long before atheism was equated with communism. And all of it was seen as treasonous. God's name was added to the Pledge of Allegiance, as well as to the national motto, all of it in an effort to fight godless communism. Religion, which had always been an important element of American identity, became a defining feature of what it meant to be a loyal American, willing to stand against the communist menace. To this day, the societal vestiges of this are all around us, really. Despite the fact, oddly enough, that America's primary contemporary enemy is not communist atheism, but fundamentalist religion. The third reason atheists are so intensely disliked is because atheists have rarely been popular anywhere. Aristotle argued that, quite apart from their beliefs, rulers and other government officials feel the need to, quote, put on the appearance of uncommon devotion to religion, unquote. Why? Well, it seems the people, Aristotle contended, tend to be less apprehensive of illegal treatment from a ruler whom they consider God-fearing and pious, and they're less likely to move against such a ruler. Sound familiar? Anyway, throughout history, doubters have been targeted and quite often executed because, in the state's opinion, and the state was often in cahoots with religion, they raised dangerous questions. Governments and religions tend to identify themselves with the status quo. Doubters challenge all that. They are therefore marginalized and dispatched. So, to summarize my response to question 1, why are atheists persecuted in America? Number 1, religion is not inherently tolerant. Number 2, atheism has been equated with communism. And number 3, atheists have rarely been popular anywhere.
When talking about morals, where do you get your your base moral codes from?
It's a good question. What is the source of the atheists or agnostics or doubters' moral compass? Clearly there's good and evil in the world. The question is, of course, what is that all about? How does one know the difference between the two? What is the source of morality? For me, it's tempting to say that the source of my basic moral code is the religious training that I received as a child in Catholic school and so on, and the religious principles in which I continued to immerse myself well into my adulthood. However, reality compels me to resist that temptation. The source of morality is human reason and our species' collective experience of living with one another for millennia. We have, in other words, learned over time the best ways to get on with one another, ways that promote not only human survival, but also human happiness. To be sure, there has been tons of trial and error in the process, and there is still plenty of bad in the world. However, there has been progress, and our reasoning, not religion, has been the engine of that progress. Let me give you an example. Human slavery. Leviticus 25:44 and 46 says, "You may acquire male and female slaves from the pagan nations that are around you. You may even will them to your sons after you, to receive them as property. You may keep them as slaves for life." Now, one might object to my using a passage from Leviticus, but I could have chosen any number of passages favorable to slavery, both in the Hebrew Scriptures and the New Testament. As the Reverend Peter J. Gomes once wrote, with such an array of texts and precedents extending throughout all of Scripture, it would not be hard, even today, to make a biblical case for slavery. Nowhere does the Bible condemn it. Everywhere in the Bible, it is the practice. If I look to the Bible as my source of morality on the question of slavery, I'm compelled to conclude it's morally acceptable. It's only when I put the Bible aside that I am able to conclude that slavery is evil. So, here is the summary of my response to question number 2. Where does the basic moral code come from? The answer is human reason and experience. Wow. Time is up, and I've only gotten to questions 1 and 2. So I will have to leave questions 3, 4, and 5 for part 2 of this video, which I will probably make sometime in the near future. Thanks a lot. This has been great.